March 24th. We'll call this meeting to order. First item of business is to consider the minutes of the Wednesday, February 24th, 2026 meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, those minutes are approved. Our next item of business is the data center ordinance. This is case ZAC 2026-00001, a request to amend the city's zoning ordinance to establish definitions and development standards for data centers, including accessory data centers, micro data centers, medium data centers, and hyperscale data centers, and to establish regulations for associated infrastructure, including fiber huts and related utility facilities. All right, staff.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Sproul. I serve as the City Zoning Administrator in the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits.
Good afternoon. My name is Hunter Garrison. I serve as the Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability.
And I know some of you have seen the presentation. We kind of modified it just a little bit, but we still wanted to include some items. So Hunter will kind of give an intro, and then I'll go over the text changes.
Great.
So thank you. And as Kim said, you guys have seen quite a bit of this presentation before, but just in case you haven't seen components of it, I'm going to go over it fairly quickly, but we can, if you have questions, please feel free to jump in. So background, we're doing this, or the city is leading this effort due to the explosive growth of data centers across the United States. Previous examples of data centers have typically been much smaller in scale, particularly in terms of energy usage, noise, and other impacts on the community. So it was time for us to look at, create definitions, and develop these ordinance modifications around data centers. So this is our tentative timeline. We're still on track with this. Today is our March 24th committee hearing. If it moves through this committee, the council will set a public hearing on March 31st, and then the public hearing will be April 28th. So what's a data center? It's a catch-all term for buildings, infrastructure that house computer services. They typically operate for 24 hours a day, require specialized power and cooling and water systems, and often resemble warehouses or even office spaces, but function very differently. And this picture here kind of does a good job of illustrating the difference. So this enterprise scale data center is very similar to the existing DC Blocks data center in Titusville. Below is a hyperscale data center in Newton County, Georgia. So you can just see the difference, and this is kind of what triggered this ordinance modification effort, in that we realized that both of these things aren't the same, so we need to create these definitions and protections for our residents. So as I said, existing data centers have been considerably smaller in scale. All our local examples thus far, we believe, have been 5 megawatts or less. However, emerging data centers are often between 200 and 1,200 megawatts. So as that energy demand increases, so do the surrounding impacts on the community, both from a grid infrastructure, water usage, as well as noise. So again, this trend has been growing nationally. There's been quite a bit of controversy around this, but we're hopeful that with these recommended changes, this will kind of create a set of guardrails that protects our community and sort of eases a lot of that tension and ensures that where they are placed, it's compatible with surrounding land uses. So we did do a bit of public engagement. There were 4 meetings with identified stakeholders, both from more environmental facing groups as well as our business community and existing data centers within the city. The feedback led to some updates on our draft. We modified our initial proposed setback requirements, water system requirements, and the elimination of some loopholes that we inadvertently created with the first draft. We incorporated feedback from both groups fairly equally, and we added some lighting conditions. So the Birmingham Planning Commission met on March 18th and recommended approval with one update. So hyperscale data centers would be, if passed as is, permitted by special exception in I-1 and MXDC3, whereas the initial proposed draft had those as PC or permitted with conditions. And then, so there's, do you want to, I'm going to hand this off to our zoning administrator, Kim Spurl, and she'll kind of walk through these next slides.
So real quick, I know Councilors O'Quinn and Vasa, y'all have seen this draft several times. I know Councilor Woods, you might not have had an opportunity to see it. But in our text changes, we are proposing new use definitions for accessory data centers, medium, hyperscale, and micro. And then we are also introducing a definition for a fiber hut. And then we have some related definitions that go along with those data center uses. And then also in your packet, you will see that we broke down each proposed new use, and we have identified the zoning districts in which they would be allowed as a permitted use, a permitted with conditions use, meaning they have to meet all the conditions listed prior to any permits would be issued. Permitted as accessory, which would mean that it would not be the principal use on the piece of property. It would be accessory to a principal use. And then permitted by special exception. And that means that the use would be allowed only after review and approval by the City Zoning Board of Adjustment. And the Zoning Board of Adjustment process does include a recommendation from the local neighborhood association. So that would provide community feedback. So we have each use defined, and then we identify the zoning districts where they would be permitted, and we also identify the conditions that would be associated with each use. As Hunter said, at Planning Commission, everything in your packet was recommended for approval with one amendment, and we did reflect that amendment in your packet. We did have I-1 and MXD use group C3 and hyperscale as permitted with conditions, and the Planning Commission recommended that those only be allowed by special exception for hyperscale data centers. And so what we did as staff, we did amend the draft, but we also had a follow-up conversation, and we thought we wanted to have this conversation with the committee. Not all hyperscale data centers are built the same. I think by some of the photographs that Hunter went over in the presentation, there's some hyperscales that are on the smaller side, like your DC blocks. And then you're going to have some of your larger hyperscales that could be over 100 megawatts. And so just a thought that we had after the Planning Commission meeting was possibly splitting the hyperscales. If they're 100 megawatts or less, they could possibly be permitted with conditions in I-1. If they're over 100 megawatts, then maybe that's the threshold to send them to a special exception. So that we were just trying to come up with some different scenarios where we don't necessarily treat them all the same when they do have the different size and power capabilities. So we just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. And then we also discussed, if you recall, we do have a spacing requirement from the BRT line in the hyperscale conditions. And it's currently at 1/4 mile, which is 1,320 feet. And in order to make that distance a little bit easier for us to measure, we discussed perhaps just making it an even 1,000 feet. That might be easier for us in our enforcement and in measuring. We still think it would be important to keep a distance requirement from the BRT, but we did hear from some of our stakeholders that during the construction phase and even during the operational phase that some of the employees will use the BRT and currently do at DC blocks to access their jobs. And so we don't want to make it prohibitive that we encourage driving to their job. So we thought the 1,000-foot separation might be more in line with something that would be amenable to the committee. So those are just two items for you guys to consider if you would like to discuss those. And then if you have any questions about any of the other conditions that we've discussed, all the other conditions remain the same from the Planning Commission meeting.
Okay. Question, so in relationship to DC Blocks, they have applied for the permitting for their expansion already, is that correct?
That's correct, for the current project, yes.
Okay, so if these zoning changes and the requirements are adopted, what I'm asking is their project they're developing right now and have permitting for going to be subject to the changes?
It would not, they would be considered what we would call legal nonconforming.
Right.
However, any expansion or additions would have to go through and follow these requirements.
Okay.
Which could possibly mean a special exception through the zoning board of adjustment, and then for the spacing, for the BRT line, possibly a variance for that spacing requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is our understanding that there is other property in the area that they own, that there could be future expansion.
Yeah, one of the things that the representative from DC Blocks brought up in the Planning Commission meeting was that I believe it was the 500-foot residential setback was going to be an issue for them in terms of their planned future development. I mean, I know you guys reduced that from 1,000 to 500, and it wasn't clear to me whether or not that had resolved their issue, or if that was still going to be an issue for them.
I think based on the proximity of their, it kind of depends on where they actually propose to put their new facility, because the way we have it worded, you measure from the equipment or the building to the residential property. I know the 500 will help them. I'm not sure if that will resolve completely that issue without seeing a site plan and being able to measure that distance.
Okay.
I'll just add on to that one briefly. Like Kim, I wasn't 100% sure if that did address their issue. I know it did help a little bit. I will say that I think the 500 is probably a still pretty solid place to land because of the noise, and you do, I think if any other hyperscale was coming in and we don't know how big their footprint is going to be, that 500 is a pretty good level of protection for residential, because the decibel output will increase almost linearly with their energy consumption. So I think the 500 is a good place where if they can't fit it in there, it's a case for a special exception. In my conversations with Mr. Armistead at DC Blocks, he did say that the current BRT buffer is actually the more challenging issue for their future development plans.
Okay. So could we bring back up the slide of the proposed additional changes? Okay. So you guys are proposing a hyperscale light for I-1, so permitted with conditions in I-1 instead of special exception. Expound on what permitted with conditions actually means.
So you say that.
Yeah, so in your packet, hyperscale is at the end, and there are 19 conditions. So whether it's a special exception or permitted with conditions, all hyperscale facilities would have to meet all 19 of these conditions. The only difference is that if it's, we're proposing for consideration and for discussion purposes, if it's less than 100 megawatts, instead of going to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, perhaps we just allow it with the 19 conditions, and if it's over 100 megawatts, then it would trigger the ZBA requirement.
Okay.
To add to what Kim was saying, the reason 100 megawatts was chosen as that threshold was in doing some research, we found that 100 megawatts is, like, it's still more impactful than the medium scale at the 30. However, once they get beyond 100, that's typically when the data center has to have 2 buildings. The build out becomes significantly larger, and that is also when you start seeing more required on-site utility infrastructure, whether that's switching stations or substations. So, there's from 30 to 100, there's different, we'd want to see them meet those hyperscale conditions. However, 100 to the higher megawatt energy usages, especially when you get, up to, 300, 500, 1,000, whatever, it becomes more significant, and that's where that special exception seems more warranted.
Councilor Balso, you had a question?
Yes, thanks. Could you explain a little bit, I know the Birmingham Planning Commission meeting last week, that they added back in a request for permitted by special exceptions for the I-1. And I'm curious as to what some of the reasoning was from the Planning Commission side. It's a large body with a lot of members that have put this request in.
I think it was just a desire for an extra level of oversight, another regulatory process. It would present an opportunity for public input, essentially, because that ZBA case would be a public hearing, and the public could come out versus, if it's PC, permitted by condition, as long as they meet all those conditions or in the correct zoning category, they're permitted to do that development without that process.
Thanks for that. I will say that I have some hesitation with the removing light manufacturing for special exemptions under the 100 megawatt, if that's what the Planning Commission had supported.
Yeah, let me ask this first. So, all of these conditions are applicable to all hyperscale facilities, even if they're in I-2 or I-3, is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, okay.
Regardless of whether it's permitted with conditions or a special exception, all conditions will apply for every hyperscale data center in the city.
Okay. So, in reference to potentially allowing the hyperscale in I-1 by permitted with conditions, I'm looking at a zoning map of the city, and there's light industrial across large swaths of the city, including, big portions of the city center, and, some on the south side, and,
And the majority of those will hopefully be changed next week in the north side, south side rezoning plan.
okay.
But we did significantly, through the framework plan rezonings, we have significantly downzoned heavy industrial properties to I-1, to general commercial, or to mixed-use districts where we could.
Well, forgive me for not having the north-south, south-side framework rezoning memorized. I know you guys got a map of that upstairs, so that might be helpful for us to see, but,
And I will say on the I-1, we do have a minimum lot size requirement of 5 acres for hyperscale. So some of the smaller footprint I-1 just wouldn't be viable unless they went through a subdivision type process.
okay.
But Counselor Quinn, you are correct. There are still properties that are light industrial now that will be rezoned to I-1 light manufacturing. There's not as many because we've tried, especially around the city center and in the south side areas, we've tried to utilize those properties and downzone them to general commercial or mixed use in order to avoid creating more legal non-conforming uses. So if there's an active light manufacturing use on those sites, we've tried to keep them. We don't want to increase legal non-conforming across the city. I know, y'all know we've had this conversation many times before. So we have taken the opportunities to downzone when we can, but there will be some properties in north side and south side that will remain light manufacturing.
Okay. So, just to be clear, you know, one of the issues with all of these data centers, but especially hyperscale, is the power generation and so the ordinance says that there's no on-site power generation allowed, period, except for if, you know, by some chance they could do solar. If they could make solar work for them, they could do solar power generation on-site.
Right, and the solar, like, we know at the scale of solar that you would need to power a data center in totality would be immense. You would need hundreds of acres. So any solar on a data center, we're very aware that that would be supplemental or charging backup batteries to offset peak power demand hours. However, you know, realistically, to get even a handful of megawatts out of a 5-acre site on rooftop, it's going to be a challenge.
Right, okay.
We did receive comment on that from DC Blocks. It's an emerging area with data centers. You see, and you know, kind of in the worst case scenario is Memphis, where you have on-site natural gas turbines burning around the clock, reducing air quality around that neighborhood. There's other instances where there's emerging technology like fuel cells that are, you know, no emissions, and other, like even natural gas that has a very low emissions factor. But I think that's a good case where ZBA comes in and they go through that process, present like, here's what we'd like to do for this on-site power generation, and here's how impactful it would be. I think that's why that protection exists.
Got it.
And I would add too, Counselor Quinn, I think since this is an emerging use across the country, as newer technology becomes available in the next few years, our staff will try to keep abreast of all the changes. And, you know, in a year or two, we may be back before you guys with amendments to the conditions. But that's something that we'll definitely try to be more proactive about, is the emerging technologies, especially as it relates to power generation.
Okay. Yeah, Councilor Vasa?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I do want to applaud the effort, PUP. I know y'all have met with several stakeholders through this process and had conversations. with appropriate parties. So just do appreciate the work that y'all have done. And again, I know the Planning Commission had a very healthy conversation last week. I still keep coming back to that same concern. Let's say there's a 90 megawatt, which is still under the 100 megawatt threshold for a permit by special exception. To include that as PC permitted with conditions is concerning. For me, 90 megawatts, very large. In my understanding, the minimum threshold for a hyperscale would be 30 megawatts, so 90 would be 3 times that. For that reason, I would recommend that we move light manufacturing back to special exception for any
Yeah, and,
usage.
just, you asked earlier about the rationale for the planning commission making that recommendation, and, you know, one of the reasons that I recall, that recommendation being made was, having the special exception, for those zone districts, gives the opportunity for stakeholders surrounding those parcels, to be notified, and, you know, of course, that's a big issue right now with one of the data centers that's being, constructed is, you know, folks that felt like they found out after the fact, so, keeping that in there, you know, would, you know, honor the planning commission's desire to give, surrounding stakeholders the opportunity to at least be notified.
And just for clarification, the draft is the planning commission approved draft. We haven't changed anything.
Okay, yeah, got it. Council Woods, got anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. So one, I'll start with the bus buffer. Could you go back and explain just the logic behind the buffer requirement associated with the bus stop?
So it was specifically for the BRT, and the reason we initially put that in there was that, you know, the BRT is where we want to see increased density across the city in terms of both housing and jobs. We know that large footprint data centers aren't very job intensive for the amount of land area they take up. So if we're trying to encourage density specifically along that BRT route and increase its usage, we felt that the data centers were maybe not contributing positively towards that. Although, you know, in doing our stakeholder research, we found that, you know, security guards at DC blocks do use the BRT to get to and from work. So, you know, it's up to this body if you want to keep that in there.
Yeah, it just kind of stood out as I didn't understand what it was accomplishing. Because what did you end up at, 150 feet, 125 feet?
It's currently at a quarter mile. One alternative that
12.
we kind of gave you for consideration was to just reduce it to a more straightforward 1,000. Ultimately, you know, as the council, you can determine what you want that buffer to be.
Our typical city block is 500 feet, is that right? Yeah,
400 to 500.
okay.
Okay. I kind of want to circle back on in terms of the categories when you're talking about hyperscale. 30 to 100 seems like a large category. Could you talk a little bit more about why it's necessary, or why we wouldn't have a category that splits that in some form or fashion?
So we landed on that just based on the professional best practices that existing today, reviewing ordinances across the country that have created definitions for data centers. It's often been 30 megawatts where that cutoff is, and it goes into hyperscale, and we haven't found many instances, if any, where it further breaks up hyperscale. That was one reason we put that optional, alteration in there for your consideration. However, yeah, typically anything over 30 watts there's kind of an industry consensus that is hyperscale.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the struggle with the conversation and especially dealing with the public and different stakeholders is just the large differences between what a 30 watt might be, a 30 megawatt might be, and a 75 or 100 plus. There's no uniformity, and so there could be a 30 to 50 watt data center that has very little, creates little concern, but you could have in the same category, just depending on the style of design and the elements they want to pull into that. I think we have mitigated against things like those gas turbines via what you have here, but that is concerning because I think you're still we're not doing enough, or I'm concerned we might not be doing enough to make the bucket smaller. So pretty much you got data center, one big bucket, everything in between. I think we are dividing that up somewhat, but I think that creates the potential for, and I think I get where you're coming from, just from the technical aspect, but this conversation is largely a public perception conversation. And so being able to articulate that, these size represent, typically you're going to see a closed loop water system. You're going to see requirement to have your electrical infrastructure built out. And that was another question. Did we address that? Typically in terms of when people are concerned about the power, cost of their individual power going up in the market, it's typically centered around the cost to build out additional infrastructure. Did we address requiring the vendor to pay for that upfront anywhere?
So I believe there are currently initiatives in this legislative session to regulate data centers and that impact on ratepayers through the Public Service Commission. However, I believe some of that gets beyond what we have the authority to do within a zoning ordinance. We do have some provisions in item 6 and requirements in terms of seeing their plan and guaranteeing that our utility provider will be able to provide full power to that site. However, in terms of impact on ratepayers, I do think that goes a bit beyond zoning.
Well, I guess kind of in the same vein, and requiring them to, the power provider be able to meet the need. Do we have room to add language in that space around no additional cost to ratepayers? And again, it's the concerns that the public brings are typically around increasing utility cost as well as water usage and then noise pollution. If you can mitigate those things, then you typically don't have problems in the vein of what the public is bringing forward.
Councilors, Julie Bernard with the Office of City Attorney. I would have to think on that as to whether we could do that. I mean, generally, rate regulations and all of that is in the purview of the Public Service Commission under, state law. So I do not know if we have that. I would have to look at that law and see if there would be any room for us to have that ability to regulate.
Yeah, I guess not necessarily regulate, but just a commitment that the infrastructure needed is in place.
Yeah, so that's actually part of the conditions. So if you look at under hyperscale,
Yeah.
item number 6, 6E, it states that known impacts on electric rates or availability for other uses directly attributable to the hyperscale data center shall be noted. And also ask for written confirmation from the electric utility that the necessary capacity is available.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that would be sufficient, to my point, so thank you. All right, so there's a lot of, references to basically, even with these closed loop systems, they have to typically at some point, replace the water, clean them, and the discharging of how they're doing that. How are we addressing, any inspection requirements and/or, fees that might be associated with city staff going to inspect how they're, getting rid of the water? Have we accounted for that at all?
So I think everything that, deals with the stormwater connection and things like that is, and their water system is dealt with in number 4. So we do, sort of further underline that no data center shall create, maintain, or permit an illicit connection or illicit discharge to our municipal stormwater system. So that is regulated through our stormwater regs, and we believe, pretty robustly.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I'm saying, how do we police that? Like, do we periodically check, or like, what does that process look like? If they are violating that, how do we find out?
It's tested. Our city engineer reviews that.
Like, I guess, is this similar to what we do with the landfill, or you got some periodic testing, or like, if you could go a little deeper into?
We're getting, the stormwater regs and, all of that's getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse, so I'll let Tracy.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tracy Hayes, and I serve as Deputy Director of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. And our stormwater program manager, they manage the illicit discharge, so they do random testing, and also they're complaint driven. So if they receive a complaint about illicit discharge, they go out and they sample.
Oh, okay. But they, on some sort of rotation, just show up different places in testings?
Yes.
Okay.
It's it's part of our MS4 permit. It's a requirement for us to do testing.
Thank you. And like I said, getting a little deeper into it, because these are questions that we all have to answer a lot more regularly now. And then two, the setback requirements, on those, do we have, like, I guess if you could point out setback requirements that are unique to this ordinance, so just say I-2, I-3, I-1, do we have setback requirements for these facilities that go beyond the rest of the zoning category?
So these setbacks are unique to data centers. We do have setback requirements for our solid waste disposal facilities, and for some of our other heavy industrial uses. And if you are in an I-1, I-2, or I-3 district currently and you abut residential, you're required to maintain whatever that residential district setback is. But these particular setbacks would be unique to data centers.
All right, so if you could talk about when I read that, I'm thinking maybe there's some concern around noise mitigation, but if you could talk about the reason for that.
So I think when our team was doing research from other cities across the country, there were quite a few that had setback requirements unless they were all targeted in one particular area. There are some parts of the country that have created, for lack of a better word, industrial parks where just the data centers are permitted. We don't have that in Birmingham. We wanted to incorporate them into our existing districts. So we felt comfortable with 500 feet in I-1 and I-3. I-1 is going to be the district that would most likely be closest to single-family residential. And that's, you know, unfortunately, that's the nature of our I-1, M1 districts, you know, for the past 60 years. There were single-family residential districts and homes that were built right next to some of our industrial uses because the workers would live there and then walk to the site for work. And we've tried to downzone some of those areas, but there are still some I-1 sites that are adjacent to residential districts. So we did not feel like just a landscape and screening buffer would be sufficient, which is why we thought that a setback in addition to buffering and screening would help protect any residential from one of these in I-1 or in I-3. In I-2, there's very little I-2 that actually abuts residential. So in I-2, we were suggesting that if they do abut residential, they utilize that existing residential setback in addition to the buffering and screening requirements.
Okay, so where are the buffering and screening requirements?
So the buffering and screening, let's see.
Yeah, I don't see that, but I think that is, from an aesthetic point of view, probably, you know, in a noise, potential
No,
noise.
we have we require the landscape buffer type. Okay, so number 11, all roof-mounted and ground-mounted mechanical equipment, generators, cooling systems, and any substation shall be screened from public view through building design, walls, fencing, or a standard C landscaping buffer in accordance with Chapter 6, Article 3 of the zoning ordinance. And C is one of our more robust buffer requirements.
And that's just the hyperscale category?
You know, we have buffering and screening for the others as well.
But not quite as robust. It's a,
Yeah, I believe we reduced it to a B buffer.
yeah. So just, the standard C involves plantings like shrubbery and trees and that sort of thing.
It can be a combination of plantings and an opaque fence. So it depends on what the applicant would propose. If it's just plantings, it would have to be a deeper buffer. If it is an opaque fence with plantings, it could be the wall and then a landscape strip. But the planting that is adjacent to the wall would be on the outside. So you would see the landscaping from the outside. It does no good if it's on the inside of the wall.
Right.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Oh,
Counselor
wait,
Tate? I'm sorry.
yeah, so, I mean, I can wrap my head around just about everything. I think the bus stop thing still kind of feels weird, but, yeah,
Yeah.
pass the ball.
Counselor Tate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got a quick question on the medium data center. I think it correlates with Council Woods. I'm curious to know, under the medium data center, why did y'all strike 500 feet and change it to 250 feet?
So that was based on our conversation with our business community and existing data center stakeholder, where we had initially proposed 1,000 for hyperscale and then 500 for medium. Just felt it was extremely burdensome. And in doing our research, aligning it with some other ordinances around the country, we felt that step down from 500 to 250, especially with our screening and other requirements, was sufficient.
So you initially started out, and correct me if I'm wrong, when your conversation with the community started out at 500 feet. is what you're saying?
It initially started at 1,000 for hyperscale and 500 for medium. We went down to 500 for hyperscale and 250 for medium. So a medium scale would, our existing DC Blocks facility in Titusville would fall into that category, so that's a good way to picture it.
Okay.
Back to Counselor Wood's, statement about the transit, setback. So you stated earlier that this was suggested specifically with the BRT in mind. So it says, any fixed way, guideway transit station, which the only fixed guideway that we have is the BRT line. Bus rapid transit station, that's obvious, what that is. Commuter rail station, or other high-capacity transit facility. So would our other fixed route bus lines fall in the category of other high-capacity transit facility?
That would not be planning's determination when they reviewed like those applications. Those routes, which are often fluid and move around, would not be applicable to this.
And it's only the stations, it's not the route itself. So like, huh? Right. So, but I'm thinking about, if you think about First Avenue North, going towards Woodlawn, there's a lot of, currently M1, north of First Avenue North. And there's a BRT station right there at the corner of, is that 34th Street? Yeah, I think that's 34th Street. And so under this rule, a data center couldn't locate within 1,000 feet of that bus stop.
Unless they applied for a variant from that condition. That's correct.
Okay. And the reason is that you're trying to preserve space for higher density employers.
If we have a 5-acre site in close proximity to one of those areas, the highest and best use most likely would be a mixed-use, high-density, multifamily development, not necessarily a 200 to 300,000 square foot industrial-looking type facility with limited number of employees.
Just out of curiosity, how did you guys come up with the 5-acre recommendation for the needed square, area?
So we kind of looked at other cities across the country, and they had a range, and we liked the 5-acre number. We felt like that was sufficient space for one of these and to meet all of our setback requirements for hyperscale at least. And obviously it could be larger. I think DC Blocks owns 16 acres or more.
They told us they typically don't even consider a site unless it's 15 acres or more.
Yeah.
But we felt more comfortable with a minimum of 5.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just wondering, like if you have a 5-acre site and you're requiring a 500-foot setback. Does that make the site undevelopable?
Well, and perhaps that's not the best use of that 5 acres.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. I think I can live with that. Any more questions? Ready to move on this? All right. So, you guys had 2 proposed amendments. The one was
They weren't necessarily amendments, they were just items to consider.
right, but
So,
I know the one was the hyperscale light, and I don't think we're suggesting that we don't go with that one. The other one was,
1,000 feet for
Okay.
the transit
right,
setback instead of 1,320.
yeah, so I would like to make a motion that we advance, the proposed zoning data center ordinance to the full council, with a recommendation for approval with the amendment of the setback for the transit stations, being 1,000 feet rather than the drafted 1,324, I think it was, or 320, yeah.
Second?
All right, so motion second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. Next case, or zoning cases, are ZAC 2025-00008. This is a request to change the zone district boundaries from R6 to QMUM in order to construct a mixed-use building consisting of residential and hospitality components.
All right, thank you. For the record, I'm Christian Togmas, and I serve as one of the planners for the city of Birmingham. So this is case CAC 2025-8, which is located within the Redmont Park neighborhood. The applicant is Randall Minor, Maynard Nexon. The owner is Arlington Redevelopment, LLC. The applicant is seeking a rezoning from R6, which is our multiple dwelling district, to QMUM, which is our qualified mixed-use medium district, in order to construct a mixed-use building consisting of residential and hospitality components. The property is approximately 0.81 acres in size, is currently vacant, and is located at 1240 22nd Street South in Redmont Park, which is just adjacent to Highland Park across the street. Property to the north is zone Q, O, and I, which is our qualified office and institutional district. To the south is O and I, office and institutional district. And both to the east and the west are zone R6, multiple dwelling district. The owner is proposing to construct a new mixed-use building consisting of residential and hospitality components. The building is proposed to have a gross building area of approximately 124,000 square feet, accessed primarily from 22nd Street South, and has a proposed height of 125 feet, which must be approved by the ZBA, Zoning Board of Adjustment, if the rezoning is approved. So the adopted long-range land use plan identifies the property as mixed-use medium, and this property is identified in the south side framework area to be rezoned to mixed-use medium. So I'm going to go over the staff comments. So there were none from zoning, no comments from landscape, from stormwater. All standard permits and ordinances shall apply for any new construction, including soil erosion and civil construction permits. The site is not located within a special flood hazard area. There were no comments from the Birmingham Department of Transportation, and the applicant went before the Redmont Park Neighborhood Association on February 24th, and they voted 4 votes to support, 23 votes to not support, and as a courtesy, they went to the Highland Park Neighborhood Association on March 10th, and they voted 20 votes to support and 4 votes to not support. So the owner provided some queue conditions as well. So if approved for rezoning, the following queue conditions provided should be considered. Number 1, submission to and approval by the planning staff of the PEP department of a site development plan to include, but not be limited to, the location and height of all structures, parking, and ingress and egress. Uses are limited to those allowed in mixed-use medium district, excluding the following, and if you'd like, I can go through them and read them off.
I think we've got them in front of us, actually.
Okay. And then from the ZAC, so they voted in favor as the proposed zoning matches the proposed south side framework rezoning, and it includes many key conditions to protect the site from any unwanted uses. And that concludes the report.
All right, thank you. So applicant present? Yep.
Good afternoon. Not the applicant, David Silverstein Jr. with the Five Stone Group, 2130 Highland Avenue South, Birmingham, 35205. Here to represent Randall. He's on spring break with his family, but here to also represent the applicant or the owner of the property as we're part of the development team. Christian, thanks for the report. I don't really have much to add, but certainly here to answer any questions that you all may have. I know that some of you are familiar with this project. It's evolved over the years. We're happy to be at this point. We've worked vigorously with both the Highland Park and Redmont Park neighborhoods, including several of their neighborhood officers to come up with a plan that we thought would be representative of the neighborhoods as a whole. One point of clarification is the Redmont Park neighborhood did take one vote to include the rezoning and the variance. So they did not vote on the items separately, whereas Highland Park did. So just wanted to make that point.
So the project generally, you guys are planning on consolidating several parcels and
No, the parcels, there were several parcels that has already been replatted, and then there's an alley between the property that has been partially vacated, which is part of this lot. So the parcels are already combined.
okay, great, all right. But the project is to develop a mixed-use building.
Correct. One building, approximately 80 keys for the hotel, somewhere between 25, 27 residential units above the hospitality component, and then a nice restaurant to serve the hotel and the neighborhood, and maybe a retail component such as like a high-end spa.
All right. Okay. Counselor Basso.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for presenting today. Can you walk us through, I'm looking at these recommendations for the neighborhood, and you kind of referenced it yourself. Can you walk us through, I see the Redmont Park Neighborhood Association vote, 4 votes to support, 23 votes to not support. That is pretty significant. Can you walk us through with that vote to not support? Was a senator around?
Yeah, sure. By way of background, again, we worked on this project. It's been about 6 years now. It started off as a much more dense project, and then we've scaled it back, ultimately redeveloped 2222 Arlington into the office building. So the original project included a condominium building and a hotel building separate, with some retail components along with it. So that original hotel had about 150 keys with closer to 50 condominium units. So we've significantly downsized the project by redeveloping 2222 and bringing it back online. I would say the biggest issue with some of the residents is the height, but the other is the use of it being a hotel. As Christian indicated, as you all are aware, the Southern Area Framework Plan is likely to move forward at some point this year. The plan calls for this site to be rezoned to mixed-use medium, which would allow for a hospitality component. We originally desired to seek a mixed-use high, as we felt it was appropriate being on the boundary of Red Mountain Expressway. It's neighbored by office and institutional uses. There are several other tall buildings around. That gets more towards the variance application related to the height. But in meeting with several members of the residents and the officers, they had a desire not for us to seek a mixed-use high because they were afraid of establishing precedent of mixed-use high within that residential area. So Ultimately, we came up with a game plan, have been working through the variance application process, feel very good about that, and decided to take the timeline of the rezoning aspect into our own hands rather than waiting for the framework plan to ultimately be adopted. So kind of two-part. Some are opposed to the use, some are opposed to the height.
Can you talk a little, thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about the pushback on the use and the pushback on the height, the reasoning behind both of those?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of them. Everybody has their own opinions. There have been comments made that there's a fear that a hotel brings unwanted visitors into the neighborhood. The type of hotel that we're looking to bring in is a high-end. We've been working with a group out of Auburn that developed the Laurel, which is a five-star hotel. They came out of, the individual that runs this hospitality group came from the Ritz-Carlton. So no offense to any other hotel flags, but this is a very high-end boutique hotel that we think would be actually very complimentary to the city, but also to the neighborhood. Redmont's a wonderful place. We office just down the street. We've done developments there and looking at other projects around the Redmont Highland Park area. So I think the fear with the hotel was some people envision a hotel, more traffic, late night bars. We're not doing a rooftop bar. If there's any type of bar concept, it would be included as part of a high-end restaurant, which would not be on the rooftop because the condominium units are above the hospitality of the hotel rooms. And if you're selling the type of condominium with the price point that we desire, the residents that live in the building need to be able to function and live there quietly as well. Related to the height, again, we have a difference of opinion. We feel that the scale is appropriate given its location. It abuts the expressway. It's next to an ALDOT right-of-way, which is undevelopable. We own the building to the south, which is an office building. To the north is an office building. And then the rest of the block, as part of the framework plan, is ultimately going to become a mixed-use district as well.
Thank you for walking us through that. It does sound like a good project itself. I do want to express some hesitation in my consideration since the Redmont Park neighborhood, which this would lie, did vote very strongly against it. So just wanted to kind of speak that out loud and maybe hear from some of my other colleagues. Thank you.
All right. Counselor Tate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many keys for the boutique hotel?
About 80 keys.
About 80, and talk to me about the condos. How many condos?
Somewhere between 25 and 27 with a penthouse at the top.
And one, 2, 3 bedrooms, or just, how many?
I don't know. I don't think there are any single bedrooms. These are luxury condominium
So
units.
2.
Two, some maybe 3, and then the penthouse is obviously much larger.
Okay, 2, 3, 2.
I don't have a definitive answer on the mix of units. I apologize.
Okay. And you said a hotel will have restaurant and like a boutique, like you, and a bar inside, correct?
What? Not a separate bar,
But it'll be incorporated.
incorporated
If I
with-
went to a boutique hotel and I wanted me a glass of wine, which I don't drink, that would be accessible to people who would want that.
To the public, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Counselor Woods?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my memory, I feel like we looked at maybe another variation of this a while back.
That's correct. So I'd mentioned about 5, 6 years ago, we were looking at a development plan that included the entire block, which included the 2222 Arlington building. And so with COVID, hospitality developments took a pause. And so rather than sitting on the project, we ultimately looked to multi-tenant that office building.
So I guess the overall footprint shrunk. What about what other changes just in terms of the envelope, took place? Cause I remember height being a concern, but looking at this is right off of 280. But yeah, what other changes, I guess, the envelope took place that you can think of?
From the original plan several years ago, well, the original plan included points of access off of 22nd Street and Arlington Avenue as like a cut through, so that's no longer applicable. But in terms of the current plan, the building envelope has not changed from what is permitted under R6. So now that the framework plan is calling for a mixed-use classification, we seek it as an opportunity to bring in a high-end hospitality to the city of Birmingham that, quite frankly, the city of Mountain Brook with Grand Bohemian captures by default. So we just view this as a wonderful opportunity, but the building envelope itself has not changed from what is actually currently permitted under R6.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah, Council Boston.
Well, two last questions. How tall is the building currently that's on the property?
It's vacant. There's not a building.
Right. And my last question would be, is this property currently adjacent to any single-family home or proximate to any single-family?
Adjacent to, no. Depends on how good you are with your 9-iron in terms of proximity to single family, but
I'm not good at all things. How proximate to single-family home?
Kim, you may know, single family, the Highland Park residents on the other side of the Crescent Denton Sorority building are probably the closest single-family homes. I don't know the actual distance, but buffered by a 70-foot tall office building.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
So are these
Council
other,
members.
I guess rooftops, are these commercial uses, I guess?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
There's some other, I guess, residential looking properties, but they may be commercial in use.
The adjacent property is Sycamore Manor, but it's not single family. There's 25 plus units in that development. And then there's some home-like looking buildings, but are commercial uses, office space.
Yeah, based on the current zoning map, everything around it is either D6 or mixed use. Okay. There's no additional questions. I'll make a motion that we recommend this to the full council with a recommendation for approval. Second. All right. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
All right, that motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
All right. Next up, we have ZAC 2026-00002, a request to change the zone district boundaries from I-4 to I-1 in order to allow for the construction of a new convenience store with drive-through. Mr. Togmas?
Thank you. For the record again, Christian Togmas, I serve as one of the planners for the city of Birmingham. So this is located within the Hooper City neighborhood. The applicant is Mike Ahmed Bagdia. The owner is Saya Sayerton LLC. So they're seeking a rezoning from I-4, which is our landfill, mining, and timbering district, to I-1, light manufacturing district, in order to construct a convenience store with a drive-through. The property is approximately 1.5 acres in size. It is currently vacant is located at 101 Sagerton Drive North. Property to the north is Zone D3, Single Family District. To the south and east are QI1, Qualified Light Manufacturing District, and to the west is Zone I4, Landfill, Mining, and Timbering District. So they're proposing, like I said, they're proposing to construct a new approximately 4,860 square foot convenience store that will have a quick service deli with a drive-through. There will be 4 fuel islands with a total of 8 pumps, meaning 1 pump on each side. The proposed hours of operations are 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. There will be approximately 2 to 3 employees at any time during operating hours. The adopted long-range land use plan identifies the property as light industrial. A convenience store is permitted with conditions in I-1, and the proposed plan meets both conditions for the use. So the applicant's site plan shows 26 parking spaces. However, the maximum number of parking spaces is 20. However, the applicant has indicated on their site plan that any parking spaces over the maximum will use low-impact development and techniques such as pervious concrete pavement. From zoning comments, so if approved, the property owner must resurvey the large lot into one separate lot for the proposed use. From landscape, the plan provided seems to not be addressing the perimeter parking and interior parking requirements. Frontage landscape buffers are shown along Daniel Payne, but no calculations are provided. The dumpster is not screened with any vegetation. It may suffice once detail of the enclosure is confirmed, and there is no foundation planning at the building, and I believe it must be a minimum of 50% of the facade frontage. All standard permits and ordinances shall apply for any new construction from stormwater. And then the site is not located within a special flood hazard area. And from Birmingham Department of Transportation, they would like to see a left turn lane into the site, in addition to providing an 8-foot wide concrete side path along the extent of the property. So the applicant went before the Hooper City Neighborhood Association on March 12th, and they voted 15 votes to support, 0 votes to not support, and a possible Q condition. So if approved for rezoning, the following Q condition provided should be considered. 1, the project engineer must notify the city engineer at least 48 hours prior to the start of construction to allow for city inspection, issuance of an adverse effects impact letter, and confirmation of the concrete class. A signed maintenance agreement between the developer and the city is required to ensure proper maintenance and upkeep of the low-impact development, including annual inspections. The zoning advisory committee voted in favor, as there was no one opposing the project, and that the proposed zoning designation is far less intense than the current zoning of I-4. And that concludes the report.
Okay, thank you. Do you happen to know what the previous use of the site was? Okay. I see that there's a lot of M1 around it. I mean, there's also M2 adjacent to it on one side and M1 on the other aspects of it. I was just wondering why this might be M4, but is the applicant present? Yep.
I'm not the applicant, but I'm here on behalf of the applicant. My name's Reed Peacock, 1720 Windsor Boulevard, Homewood, Alabama, 35209. I'm not sure of the previous use of that land. I've been in direct contact with the owner for some time now throughout this project. He bought it some time ago. I'm not sure what the use was. I believed it was just raw land, to my knowledge. I think the overall area will be some type of industrial park use. I know there's a tire distributor going to the east of this property.
Okay. Counselor Tate?
So, where's the applicant?
Sorry.
Where's the applicant?
The
applicant, where is the applicant?
He's previously had surgery and can't be here today.
Okay. And so this is off of Daniel Payne Drive? Okay,
That's
so it's
correct.
over
Yeah.
by, towards the Flying J and that?
Yeah, so you pass that pilot, Flying J right off the exit would be to your right. you go past a new turn-in road, I don't have it in front of me, that goes
Road.
back to another industrial use, that is a newer road that's been put in the past couple of years.
Okay. And so it's not, it's over on the industrial side, not where the people homes are.
No, there's some homes across the street, and then as mentioned, there's some homes behind this. But most of it is zoned, I have it here. Most of it's zoned light industrial, and then the, pilot is zoned C2, and then there's that D3 that is back behind it to the northeast of this property. And you have I-1. We thought there were several classifications to go forth with, but we thought I-1 was the best use of that, as there's I-1 surrounding this property across the street, behind it, and to the west.
Okay, I'm kind of looking, so give me a second here. So off of Sarrington Road, you would have to literally drive off this road to get, is this Colberg Road that we getting on right here?
Yeah, it's,
Colberg?
So you wouldn't,
Campbellton?
you would just enter off Daniel Payne.
Campbell Lane, okay,
yeah, so the entrance would be on Daniel Payne,
right.
and it's closer to, Center Street, I guess, 40th Terrace North, Center Street.
Okay, so it's on that side, if I get off on the Daniel Payne exit and come in front of the Flying J, so it should be like.
It's on the same side of the road as the
Side
Flying
road,
J.
okay. Okay, so one of those side roads will take you to where he's trying to do.
So you would still enter on off Daniel Payne. You wouldn't go up that side road that goes back to that industrial building.
Okay, all right, that's all the questions I have, thank you.
All right. Counselor Bosse, you good? All right. All right. Committee, I'm going to make a motion to recommend this to the full council for approval. All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can you
That
make
motion passes.
can you amend that for the queue to include the queues if you want?
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me,
Do you want me to read that?
yes,
Oh, sure.
please. Yes.
So the project engineer must notify the city engineer at least 48 hours prior to the start of the construction to allow for city inspection, issuance of an adverse effects impact letter, and confirmation of the concrete class. A signed maintenance agreement between the developer and the city is required to ensure proper maintenance and upkeep of the LID, including annual inspections.
Right, so just for clarification, that's the only key, the ones you stated are the only Q conditions that would apply.
Correct.
So let the record reflect that my motion included the Q conditions. All right, all in favor say aye. Aye, all right, got that taken care of. Okay, that completes our zoning cases. Any old business? All right, motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor?